Hi everybody, hope you're doing marvelously well. This is where we're at. We're at Studioszene 2023 here in beautiful Hamburg. So it's going to be a fun day because we're going to do a podcast here. Jaycen, Joshua and myself are going to go on the stage over there and do a Q&A and a general discussion on AI. That should be interesting, maybe. And then I'm going to do a masterclass in the igloo over here. And I'm going to pull up a song and I'm going to spend time talking about low end because I feel like it's a much maligned, a very ignored discussion point.
So yeah, we're here with Warren Huart, live broadcasting today, this podcast. How are you, Warren?
I'm great. I was just saying, I've been to Hamburg, I think 3 times. The problem is when I came here in a band, I would pull up in a van at like 8 o'clock at night, offload my equipment, play a show, get back in the van and drive away. So this is the most amount of time I've ever spent in Hamburg in daylight in my life.
That
it's
is
beautiful.
Exactly what I did last time.
Yeah, you know what I mean? It's like I'm actually here in daylight. Yeah.
Well, that's really cool. Really good to have you. How did you end up, becoming a producer from being a musician and then an educator from being a producer? Just a little bit of this backstory.
Well, it sort of actually was always in tandem.
Okay.
Because when I was a little kid, I was 15 when I first started playing guitar. And what I would do is I would take a tape cassette. My dad had a little Philips. Anybody remember cassette players? Dating myself. The Philips one that was like the classic one, and then he had a Sony Hi-Fi. So what I would do is I would record on like the little Philips, play like a da 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 kind of really bad kind of pentatonic run. Really badly on my guitar, then take that out, put it in the 70s hi-fi, my dad's old 70s hi-fi, press play, and then do an overdub back onto the other cassette player. So I was already, right from the get-go of learning to play the first stuff, recording. So while I was in bands, I was still like engineering though.
Oh, yeah.
And I had, like probably many people here, I worked in music stores. So I worked in 2. One of them is very famous. You all know Anderton's. Mm-hmm. I worked at Anderton's. Lee Anderton's actually a very old friend of mine. So I worked there, but I also worked in a much more local store. Anderton's was close to me, but there was another one called Kingfisher Music, and I was there. So what I would do is I'd sell PA and recording equipment. And I also worked part-time at a recording studio that my friends had. So I was like doing everything. I was playing in club bands, going out, doing covers, writing songs. I was teaching guitar. I was just kind of a bit of everything. So I feel like, I've said this many times before, but I don't mind repeating it. I feel like my journey to become a producer, an engineer, and a mixer, and become successful on it is basically what everybody has to do now.
Yeah.
There's no like, you're an engineer and you're making, 6 figures a year, engineering massive records. Yeah. It doesn't happen like that anymore. Even I can name many, many famous engineers that are doing independent records at the same time as doing the occasional major label one. They're also educating, they're also designing gear, designing plugins. It's what I do is what all of you have to do now, which is like be little social media mavens and get yourself out there and get people find you so you can record. It's just the business, it's what we do. So I felt like it was a really good opportunity to launch Produce Like a Pro because my way of coming up is the modern way, even though it happened 15, 20 years before kind of the revolution in the internet. It still was exactly the way stuff. There's a phrase in England, jobs worth. People, I don't know what the German version of it is, where people like I was only hired to do this. That kind of like jobs worth mentality. It's more than my job's worth. You can't be in music and do that. So for a tangent for a second, not very often, but every now and then somebody will put a comment up like, how do you find better clients? And I'm just like, the question is the problem. The fact that you've asked that question is the problem. You can't think that way. You just got to do the job. So often, Ace won't mind me telling you this, but I did 3 albums with Ace Frehley that I co-produced. You know, they'd bring me the tracks and we'd end up having to recut stuff. And often when he sent me something just to mix, there would be like no stereo guitar in the chorus because he's got so many ideas. So he would put down like a really cool lead part on the left channel and then he'd do a strumming part on the right. And it was like, well, where's the balance? Right. And so I would either go to the second chorus and pull in the rhythm part and put it on the first. But often I was like, there needs to be some breaks in there. I just need a clang, just to lift the chorus. So I'd plug in a guitar and do it.
Right.
And he would listen back to it and know that those weren't his rhythm guitars, but he did not give a crap. All he wants is the record to sound great.
Yeah.
That's our job.
Yes.
Our job is to empower people.
Yes.
The best compliment I've ever got is when you work with an artist, you help them understand what good songwriting is, what great arrangement is, and all that kind of stuff, and then they come back to you next year to make the next record, and their songs are better, and their arrangements are better, and their performances are better because you help them do that.
Yes, totally. So, Warren, thank you again for doing this with us, for the time I spent here. We're already at the end of our podcast slot here, unfortunately.
One of the greatest skills in life is to always hang out with people that are much smarter than yourself. So I'm hanging out with Jaycen. How are you, my friend?
I'm very good, sir. How are you?
It's good. This is going to be fun. We're going to do a panel on AI. I don't know what we're going to talk about.
I have no idea. I'm following your lead.
I'm following yours. So it's got your name first, so I think you're supposed to be...
I'm looking down at you, though.
No! To be really blunt, Mark said, what do you guys want to talk about? And we're like, well, whatever you like. And he goes, cool, can you talk about the future of AI in music production? And talk about speculation.
I mean, I think we're so early on in the realm of thinking of AI in music production. It is speculation. The one thing that I can say is in software and in software design, it's gone a long way. I think a lot of the newer plugins that are going to come out are going to be AI driven. There's a couple of leaders in that, Soothe being one, that is an AI driven plugin that's revolutionized, I guess you could say, many facets of the audio world. But when it comes to mixing per se and having artificial intelligence tell you what your ear is telling you, it just seems a little bit too subjective for me.
Because if it's reinforcing something you already do creatively, that's very different than doing what I think everybody fears, which is sort of the lowest common denominator stuff. You know, is this our musical version of the only movies that are successful now are sequels?
Well, I think that's the kind of fear that I have. I think the best way for us to figure out how to maneuver with it is just to wait and take time and take a minute to understand what we're dealing with.
The reality is this is probably the first industry that's going to hit the hardest. Do you know Flostradamus?
Yeah.
He's been in this for a while now. And I think one of the advantages to AI that he's seeing is that he can take a song that, say, you wrote and say, well, look, maybe Christina Aguilera is going to be good on this. I've got the AI technology that I can emulate her vocal, send it into her people, and even though it won't be exactly how she would sing it, and it's not going to be what she's going to do, it's going to be close enough for her not to have to bother running into a studio, spending $1,000, and then spending another $500 to have somebody comp it, you know, to find out whether it sounds good or not. So there are good reasons for this. But like anything, I suppose we're all in fear of how it's going to be manipulated. But I feel like my gut reaction when it first became such a big talking point was the only thing it's really going to affect is the average. Not the cutting edge, not the would never have thought of it kind of music, something twisted and weird, new. It's just going to be the generic. That's just going to suffer. And in some ways, I don't really care. If it's just like that bed music in some terrible, frickin', Kardashian kind of thing. Sorry, but you know what I mean. If it's just one of those TV shows and it's in the background that's now being written by AI, do I really give a crap? I feel like that's the thing that's going to be first affected. I don't think it's going to affect some kid, in his parents' bedroom. If anything, if it levels the playing field for some people, then good. Every piece of cutting-edge music that we all grew up listening to maybe there's an exception to somebody, but doesn't usually come out of Beverly Hills. by some kid in there. It usually comes out of a very poor area where somebody is pushing against something, trying to create something new. It has to have that edge. It has to have... music for me as a kid, and you and everybody here, was rebellion, wasn't it? It was pissing off your parents. So if there's something that levels the playing field, that comes down and allows that kid to do something, because there's a tool out there which allows the idea in his head to come out.
The most that I've seen was the ability of stripping vocals or stripping the music from the vocals, and having, which I still don't understand how they do, but having, taking a stereo file and then making vocals, making drums, making hi-hats, making unbelievable separation of it, and then having the ability as producers to take that loop, to take that sample, create something new, create something better. It's only going to help people. However, it is going to make the medium really medium.
Yeah.
Because there's going to be an abundance of it.
Right. You're 100% right. I'm thinking about, you remember, like, early 90s hip-hop was all about sampling off of classic records. And
everybody was, hey, what is this? Yeah. This is bullshit. Real musicians.
It's going to be the death of real musicians. Well, I don't know if anybody's ever looked at that little thing called the internet, but have you noticed when you go on to YouTube or whatever, there's a billion, like, virtuoso guitar players, sax players, whatever. Musicianship is at its highest level it's been in decades. Have you noticed that? Like, everybody's, like, shredding and learning. Well, you know what? When music like that happened, it introduced people to classic records and classic playing. Like, there wouldn't be a Snarky Puppy and all the derivatives of that if it wasn't for that. You've got to get the music in front of people. And there's also that kind of reaction. What I love is, like, the more homogenized music gets, the more perfect it gets, the more human beings rebel against it and want to do something else. Punk rock came about in Britain, at least our punk rock, in the late 70s, because everybody was tired of listening to prog and it being so highbrow and so elitist, and they wanted to be like, here's the streets. Two-tone. Anybody know, two-tone and ska? That was our country, well, my country in Britain, rebelling against the establishment, because the Houses of Parliament and the House of Lords were all a bunch of 60-plus-year-old white men. And yet our country didn't look like that. So this genre came from Coventry, and it was a complete mixed race, mixed punk meets, reggae and ska. So the more it goes in one direction, the more opportunity there is for rebellion. So it's almost like, bring it on, because what some kid's going to wake up and go, you know what? I'm going to do something oblique to that and kick down some doors. So, yeah, everybody's always afraid of something, but I feel like it actually increases the opportunity for creativity.
I have no problem in admitting that I'm a very, 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 very novice when it comes to AI. But what I can say is that it has changed my life in the software world. But more importantly, it's not being afraid of something that you have no idea what you're looking at, and not being passed by. I mean, I know a lot of people will probably be like, you know what, the AI stuff is not for me. But then that might put you behind the 8 ball, because people might have an advantage that you could easily have had if you just, try to wrap your fingers around it. So I guess my main thing would not be to tell people is not be afraid of it.
Yeah. All right, so what I have a song here I did. Like I said, I co-wrote it, I played on it, I engineered, I produced it, and I did a mix. So this mix down here, I believe, is something I did on an SSL a million years ago. Like probably about 6 years ago when I first did this song. So let's have a quick listen to it.
Is this normal? How it became, and war after war after war with me. Are you satisfied the way I bleed, and war after war after war with me? Numb me up, dumb me down, baby, shut me up, steal the truth, hate me. I'll be yours till I die, till I die, till I die crazy.
First of all, to me, that screams console mix, old console mix, which in the right circumstances is actually pretty wonderful. Trust me, I love consoles. However, our ears are so tuned to in-the-box mixing. Even the biggest of the bigs mix in the box now. The immediacy of it is so fantastic. It's a conversation that 5 years ago was just on its dying out kind of conversation where everybody was arguing analog versus digital. I think most of us have settled on the fact as long as it's coming in at the best quality you possibly can, then mixing it, entirely in the box is not that big of a deal. Now, if, of course, you're recording everything with virtual instruments, you're doing everything super digital, you might be looking at ways of messing stuff up a little bit. But if you have the ability to have nice microphones, some decent mic pre's, maybe some compression, throw some tubes, some valve gear in there somewhere, you're going to get a lot of coloration on the way in. Therefore, mixing in the box becomes really not that big of a deal. I found that for me, for instance, like the Burl stuff, you all know the Burl converters, B-U-R-L, Burl. Somebody said, you have to try these out. And the first time we ever tried them out, they were relatively new. We were mixing the Aerosmith record, and I remember we did a shootout. And this is no disrespect to Burl, but it's an illustration of what I'm talking about. We had the Burl ones, we had Lavery, we had Avids, we had Apogees, all these different converters. And we shot them all out and printed the same mix through every single one, and then went back and listened. And for me, I was like, I don't need the Burl converters, because I just threw, hundreds of thousands of dollars of analog equipment at the front end of this with really beautiful tube microphones, with amazing mic pre's, incredible compression. And also we hit tape on the way in and then edited digital. It's like I didn't need to add those additional transformers and stuff like that. It's where a lot of these kinds of conversations get very, very complicated because each of your situations is very difficult. It's very different. So when I get asked questions, the first thing I do is ask a question of you. If somebody said to me, should I buy a Burl, interface, for instance, I would be like, well, what's your front end? And if your front end is a ton of really expensive, beautiful, analog equipment, then maybe you don't need that. But if your front end is really, really super clean, you've only got a $300 mic, most of your stuff is virtual, then yeah, some transformers, some other stuff in the way is going to help. That's why in our business, there is no one size fits all. It really is based on your individual circumstances and also the results you're going for. All right, so let's have a listen to some of the drums here. I actually did some time adjusting on the kick in and kick out. So again, this is no samples, this is very minimal amounts of anything. So the reason why I do this, and there are lots of really fancy plugins out there, like the auto align plugins, you guys know about those ones, where you can sit there and you can align all of your drums so they're all phase coherent. You can do that if you want. I remember Andy Wallace a few years ago talking about that kind of thinking. He said the problem is when everything is so perfect, it starts to sound small. I don't mind a bit of a smearing. I do like things to be, the polarity in the face to be accurate, of course. That makes perfect sense, especially with low-end things like kick drums. So if you see here, where my cursor is, down here, this distance here is about 100 samples. If you look over here, see where I'm saying there? I don't know what DAW you use, but I'm sure every DAW has this function. It says length. So the selected area says 103. You could split hairs, but I made it 100. So what that means, it means this top mic here has been delayed and moved back. Now at this point, I usually get asked the question, why don't you just pick up the file and drag it back? You can if you want. It's perfectly fine. Personally, I find that once I start messing inside of a group with something, you can get carried away. If you want to literally just pick up the file and try to match the phase as much as you want, feel free to do it. Personally, I don't do that because I find that once I've got my drums and I start moving things around and then I change my mind and I'm 465 edits behind trying to figure out how many undos and trying to get the phase correlation back to where the original is, it just seems a bit counterproductive to me. If I can just delay it with a plugin like I'm doing here, I'm happy to do that. However, if you want to use an auto-align plugin, do it, but just be mindful that part of the feeling of a drum kit is some of the wrongness. When you walk into a room and you hear a drummer playing in a great live room, the fact that things are kind of bouncing off walls and stuff like that is part of the sound. You know, as much as we want everything to be really direct and phase coherent, of course we want that. We want the polarity to be perfect. But also remember, life isn't like that, you know. A little bit of roughness isn't a bad thing. So with all the plugins off, and with that time delay done, this is what we got. It's not bad, but let's put the time adjuster on and see if it's something sounds different to you. I can hear it even on these little tiny headphones, but can you hear just like the low end is just that little bit sweeter? It's not. Sometimes the difference is negligible. It's like, oh yeah, I got 10% better. Yeah, but you know, I used to believe in this thing they used to call the 1% rule. You probably have heard this years ago. The 1% is like if you go through everything that you're doing, the way you record, the way you mix, the way you master, whatever, you just make everything just that little tiny bit better. It adds up. You know, that kind of detail that we put in is worth it. And the other thing is, it connects you to the music. You know, if you're doing little things like this and you're just doing that, you get connected to it and you're more in it. So often when I'm setting up a session like we're doing here, I'm looking for things like that to just get me to focus on it. Like, okay, I just want this kick to sound a bit bigger, you know, a bit more low end. Doing that immediately focuses my mind on how the kick drum sounds. One of the biggest things when I'm interviewing mastering engineers is like, I always get asked by everybody, what's the optimum level I should be printing at? You've probably read that in every forum ever. What everybody always says, what level should I be printing at? You ask a mastering engineer, they will, all of them will say the same thing. I don't give a flying whatever. And because it doesn't matter to them. It's their job to get it to level. What they do care about is clipping. And what they most importantly care about is good clarity in the low end. Because it is impossible to solve that problem. That's the kick there. Now, I'm going to keep going on the... I'm going to keep going using no samples at the moment, and we'll see if there's any advantage to the samples adding them in. All right, so here's the kick. Now with the snare, again, this is like the rough situation, so there's no real mixing done. All I've done here is boost some low lows. So what I did is I boosted about 120. Again, this is not arbitrary. It says 119. It could be anywhere in this general vicinity here. And then, but I've also high passed at 80. But as you can see, even though it's high passed at 80, because I boosted in that area, it's not like a brick wall or anything around about 80. One of the things I learned when coming up on consoles, but also being a musician, and getting to be and sit in a room with Dave Jordan and Jack Douglas and all these people I grew up admiring their work, is that they would do these things like Jack's thing is to boost lower than you want to hear. And the reason why he would do that is because he doesn't want things to sound EQ'd. Hopefully I'm not speaking too fast if you're not all native English speakers, but when people say, oh, it sounds really EQ'd, what they mean is you can kind of hear the boost points. You ever heard those kind of mixes where everything's kind of going, you know, it sounds like they've taken a guitar, it's kind of going rang, 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 you hear this, you kind of hear this frequency ringing. You know, you've all heard ringing, which is associated with certain types of EQ. What that is because they've gone maybe to the fundamental, which they're trying to push up in the mix, and they've boosted it. But then it feels artificial and it feels enhanced in just that area. What Jack would do is he would go, well, I want to bring up that. So he would always go below it. So for a snare drum, let's say he wanted more like 110 to 150. He wanted to hear some of that thump. He'd actually go below it, boost it, and then cut up to that area. So what that does is, let's just say on this snare here, he would maybe go really super low here. But you see what it's doing? I'm just saying, look. This is one of those instances where I'm actually saying, look. Because it's creating, this is the area he wants to bring up. But because there's a high pass on it, it is creating the ability, like I can make it sharper, to boost the area you want, but without it doing sort of this ugly kind of cue built around that frequency. It's actually going lower in it, so you get the smoothness. You all know like Marg and stuff have the air band at 32K. You know that EQ? So 32K. Who the heck listens at 32K? Not a single person, not even when you're born. Nobody can hear 32K. But what it's doing is just basic logical physics. Here's your 32K up here. You boost it. Here's where your ears start hearing. It just creates this nice, gentle slope. So it just does a really beautiful, soft curve all the way up in that high end, which makes things sound brighter, but doesn't make them sound brittle. It's just a lovely way of boosting it. It's just simple, basic logical physics. So if you're trying to get some, more low end down there, sometimes coming below and boosting up will give you this beautiful soft curve. And then what Dave Jordan was used to do was cut with the same place he was boosting. So it would give him like kind of this much sharper drop off, but still give him this sort of low lows. So this is the end of day uno, ein day of Studioszene in Hamburg. It was a lot of fun. I'm probably completely and utterly talked out. When we finished here with the masterclass, we did 4:30 to 6. I didn't think anybody would show up because, quite frankly, we had done a Talk Over There podcast, and then Jaycen and I did one on the stage there, and they were all fully booked up. So I was like, who the heck is going to come back here after they see me talk? Well, thank you everybody that showed up. It was a nice packed house, and I really, really enjoyed it. We got to talk about more of the why rather than the how, because there's a lot of stuff that's taught about how to do something, but I wanted to talk about why you would want to do it to get your mixes to sound, well, clear and translatable to any particular medium. So thanks everybody that came in. That was a wonderful first day of Studioszene 2023 here in beautiful Hamburg. So long, farewell, auf Wiedersehen, au revoir, adios, tschüss, goodbye.